Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of the show. This is a viewer-requested topic here today, and I've pulled in the two guys who I think could best help me with this topic. Welcome, Phil Aston and Martin Popoff.
Yes, morning.
Deep
Hi.
Purple
Yeah.
family tree discussion, right? So, good morning, gentlemen, and good afternoon, Phil. It's
Hi.
lately we're doing all these shows with people from all over the globe. It's kind of hard to remember who's where and what time it is and
Exactly.
all that good
Exactly.
stuff. So Deep Purple, right? So most folks know Deep Purple has a pretty lengthy family tree, but most notable in this family tree, you've got the four big bands. You got the main band, Deep Purple, and then you got the three big offshoots, which were Gillan, Rainbow, and Whitesnake. So one of our viewers asked us, could you guys do a show where you talk about these four bands? What made them so good? Which bands do you guys prefer and why? What are some from your favorite albums, favorite songs? Which bands do you think overall had the stronger catalogs, which is hard because you've got the big lengthy catalog of Deep Purple with all its marks and eras. You've got the fairly lengthy catalog of Whitesnake with all its different incarnations. You've got the compact discography of Gillan, although very strong. And then you've got Rainbow, which again, not a huge discography, but different lineups, different feels, different eras, right? So that's what we've tasked ourselves with. So we're kind of gonna, I guess what we should do is go one at a time and talk, I guess put them in the ranking that you prefer them and why, and kind of talk a little bit about what the pluses and minuses of some of these are. So Phil, why don't we have you kickstart us off here?
Right. I think the Deep Purple families is a great subject for discussion. Is that Deep Purple one of the few bands where every member was famous, every member was known. Apart from bands like Yes, I can't think of many other bands where you knew everybody in it, and everybody in it went off and had a successful career. And whether that includes Coverdale or Hughes or Tommy Bolin or Steve Morse, the tendrils of the Deep Purple family just spread out, and all of them, everybody within it was a known musician. And I think that's what gave the catalyst for me when the band imploded, and as many times as it did, it just took off with those ex-members being able to establish themselves and already have an audience for them to go out and play in front of. I can't think of many bands that were able to do that. I mean, even Ian Pace, went off and did, a stint with Gary Moore and stuff, was a known drummer. So before I kind of go on that, I mean, do you both agree with that as a band, that kind of makes them unique? I mean, you could say that Black Sabbath were all known, but they didn't all go off and do their own thing. Purple are quite unique in that respect.
Or hard rock for sure. Yeah, I think you're bringing up Yes is a perfect example of a band on the prog front that kind of did the same thing, sort of, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
King Crimson maybe as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Exactly, but everybody within it had a fan base to explore. So if I kind of succinctly bring it together, what I feel is that Deep Purple, each album was different. There was a different flavor to it. Machine Head is different to Burn, and Burn is different to Stormbringer, is different to Come Taste the Band, and in rock, etc. So if I then look at the offshoots, to me, the band that comes next in that list is Gillan. And the reason is because it was so different. Child in Time, Clear Air Turbulence, Scarabus, Mr. Universe, the Japanese album, Future Shock. They were all very different live. They were very raw, very, probably why yesterday's discussion, the Gillan band didn't have great success in the States, probably because it was too unpolished. But it was a very, Gillan was plugged more into the new wave of British heavy metal than the others. I think by the time that arrived, Rainbow, who were the first out the gate with Rainbow Rising, the first album. So everybody in the UK, when Purple finished, all eyes were on Blackmore. And what was Blackmore going to do? But I think as the time went by, Gillan floated to the top because you just didn't know what Gillan was going to do next. And Whitesnake, as we discussed yesterday, kind of crept out. Everybody wanted Whitesnake to release this ultimate album. And as much as we in the UK loved that first installment of the Whitesnake story, it's obvious that it was what David wanted to do, and his real success was going to be another decade on from the, you know, from when Purple finished, really. So yeah, Gillan, it would be Gillan, Rainbow, and Whitesnake in that order for me.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Martin, what's your take, Martin?
Well, I'm going to start with Whitesnake as the bottom one here, and even though I did a Whitesnake book, which is long out of print, I am a big Whitesnake fan, but I guess I'm putting them fourth, so I'm going to complain about Whitesnake, I guess, a little bit. So this is actually one of the rare ones where I've got one of my silly little framed up things for every one of these bands. So there's my Whitesnake one. We got Tommy and John Sykes and David Coverdale on the greatest hits there. So you know, when this band first came out in Canada, we had that crazy situation where our first Whitesnake album was not Trouble. It was the EP mixed with some Coverdale tracks.
Oh yeah,
Coverdale's Snakebite.
Snakebite, yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of weird. But yeah, so early on it was a little bit kind of too bluesy for us. A little bit too funky, a little bit too you know, Ian Gillan band, a little bit too Pace Ashton Lord or whatever. Like you know, that whole, I did a podcast episode on how all the Deep Purple guys got crazy for a little while there in the late 70s sort of thing, and David Coverdale included.
Experimental. Yeah.
You know, and then I consider them going into what I call the Kiss period of this band. So definitely, I mean, Ready and Willin' is not that, and it was sort of the classy one with gravitas. But the next ones, Come and Get It, Saints and Sinners, and Slide It In, I put all as a bunch together. I know, Phil, you're not a big fan of Saints and Sinners. I like it a lot because my favorite songs, I mean, I love Dancing Girls, I love Young Blood. Those two really stand out for me as great songs, and I like the raw, powerful production of it. It's a little grittier. But yeah, I still complain about this end of it too, because this end feels like you know, you're really starting to notice the lesser number of IQ points in David's lyrics and in the music. The music, like I say, is Kiss-like. It's their British Steel period. It's their poppy, you know, stripped down, simple sort of sound, right? A little AC/DC-ish kind of thing. And then, of course, as they move on, you know, I even still have there's parts of even the Whitesnake album I'm not a big fan of, and Slip of the Tongue. We all know the complaints about that. Well, there's kind of really no band gelling there, and it's Whitesnake 87 Part 2. So yeah, so I guess I kind of complain about this band a fair bit. I like large swaths of every album, but you know, this is a band where I would say 2/5 of every album I'm not particularly a fan of, and that's enough to put them in the number 4 slot. So
I'm 100% behind that. I would think that Whitesnake, every time they released an album, I automatically bought it, and I always felt that there was at least a third of it that wasn't up to the same stature of other tracks within it.
Yeah. Love the metal stuff. Almost never liked the mellow stuff. I liked when I felt that infectious party spirit of the honky tonk and kind of party boogie stuff sometimes as well. And then there's like a fringe sort of element of a few things, especially early on, where they felt just way too obscure and way too funky and a little bit too Glenn Hughesy for me, sort of thing. So yeah, Whitesnake in the 4th slot.
Cool.
Yeah.
Keep going, Martin. Keep going.
Oh, what? Me do another one? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So 3rd slot. Again, I've done a book on this band. This one is still in print, and I really stand by it because it's been through the ringer twice. So that's a good book, that one. So I'm putting Rainbow in the next slot. And there's my my framed up thing with every single vocalist there. We got Ronnie, Graham, Joe,
yeah, fantastic.
and, Doogie on those ones. So I'm putting Rainbow here because I'm not the biggest fan of this album. Love Rising, love Long Live Rock and Roll. You know my thoughts on this album. This is my favorite Rainbow album. I'll defend it to the death. I think Lost in Hollywood is the greatest song they ever did. And I love Eyes of the World on here as well. I love the production. I think Cozy Powell's greatest drumming performances on this album. But you know, I think in the Joe Lynn Turner years, I've always said that I don't think they quite had it together. There's sort of a disconnect between The song styles, and even I think the production's a little weak on Difficult to Cure and Straight Between the Eyes. But I really think they finally, at the end, just before it all imploded, really came up with a unified, cool, interesting sound on Bent Out of Shape, where I feel like, and the green of that album cover really makes me feel it. It has kind of a regal pageantry sort of feel about it. Yet I love the idea that Richie eventually evolved away from having to be the guitar god all the time and have guitar everywhere, and he did have this sort of foreigner-ish thing that was possibly inspired by Joe Lynn Turner a little bit, being the lead singer for this band. So yeah, love Rainbow to death. But I'll put them in the third slot. Should I keep going?
Sure.
Want me to keep?
Well, I'll just interject there, because
Okay,
again, I totally agree with you, Martin. So because the first album, the anticipation in the UK for the first album, there were posters everywhere. There's that the inside cover of the first Rainbow album, that pose that Blackmore's doing. That poster was everywhere in the UK. So the anticipation of what that was going to be like, and John Peel, which was a big DJ over in the UK, played Man on a Silver Mountain and Still I'm Sad. I think, yeah, and 60th Century Greensleeves. And we just thought, wow. But when the album arrived, it was kind of lukewarm, I guess. But the anticipation for Rising was so huge that Tarot Woman was such an epic opener that the next three tracks kind of like, they were like pushed to the side because of side two, because of Stargazer and Light in the Black. And because it's not I don't feel it's a perfect album, Rising, but it's got this stature now that it sits at the top of the mountain as like a statement that can't be bettered. And side two, I remember, that feeling just before the guitar solo starts in Light in the Black, you just knew that whatever's going to happen next after that Tony Carey solo, that this is going to be one of the best things that Richie's ever done, and it was. And Dio's vocals were just on fire, and it was just like exhausting to get to the end of that track. But I think Blackmore he wanted that success in the States, so he started twiddling with the controls behind the scenes, and I started to feel that even with Long Live Rock and Roll, that he'd shortened the tracks and the guitar was further back in the mix. And then we come to Down to Earth, which is your favorite, which is interesting because I loved it as well, because Blackmore was suddenly like mainstream. He was in the singles chart with Since You've Been Gone and All Night Long. Lyrics aside, it was like it's fantastic. And Monsters of Rock Festival was in the UK, and Rainbow headlined it, and they were massive. But I felt then that the next one, Difficult to Cure, was a real downer. Sold massively over here. I think I Surrender got to number 2 in the charts, but it was downhill. And I liked Straight Between the Eyes. There was some good stuff on there, but like you, Martin, Bent Out of Shape, I felt was a return to form. I think there's some marvelous stuff on there, and I felt that was another high point. I know a lot of people actually don't like Bent Out of Shape, but I think there's some wonderful songs on it and some great playing on it as well.
I mean, I know most people that I knew at the time felt that Bent Out of Shape was a step down from the previous two because it was a little more poppy and very American sounding, and that's what Blackmore was going for. But it's still a fine album, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But Phil, it's interesting. So when you look at the three bands, purely, I guess, from a sales perspective, were they all kind of on par with each other? Was one bigger in the charts than the other? I know Gillan was pretty consistent with the releases over there, Invisible here, or was it Rainbow or Whitesnake that were probably the more popular of the two?
I would say that was a kind of mentioned in yesterday's discussion that around the 1980 mark, all three of them were in the top 5 album chart every time they released something. But obviously Rainbow were there first. Gillan wasn't anywhere with the Gillan band, and Whitesnake were quite low down. But by the time we got to the 1980 axis of like Ready and Willing and Down to Earth and Glory Road by Gillan, all of them were in the top.
This is like the main general chart, not some ghetto metal chart.
No, this is the incredible. UK. This is the UK album chart. All of them.
Okay.
All of them.
You'll see that here, right, Martin? That's crazy. Right?
This is just the normal standard UK album chart, and then we had a TV show called Top of the Pops, and all 3 bands were on there. They literally is. I mean, we had a lot of rock in the charts then. You know, Sammy Hagar was in the charts. With everybody was in it. Iron Maiden, but though, and of course we had, as I said yesterday, Deepest Purple, a compilation that EMI quickly thought, "What's going on out there?" Pushed that out, and it went straight to #1 in the album charts. So everything, the Purple family at that point was complete. Each of them were as big as each other. But I feel that as the 80s began, they started, as the new blood of the new bands was coming along, they started to lose their sight of where to go. Obviously Rainbow, Richie wanted America, so as he started to go in that direction, the UK audience just kept thinking, well, it's not like Rainbow Rising, is it? It's not like Long Live Rock and Roll. But Bernie Tormé left Gillan, and Janek, who obviously went on to be in Iron Maiden, it mellowed it. The production was different, and it wasn't as raw as before. So Gillan's star started to dim a little bit. And Whitesnake, I know, Martin, you feel that Saints and Sinners they were still firing on all six, but it was like diminishing returns for Whitesnake as well, in that camp, really.
Yeah. I've told Phil this before. I love when he calls this stuff rock, right? You know, English people have it. That's the term for this stuff in a way, right? Hard rock, heavy metal. It's called rock. You know, as distinguished against everything else. It sounds kind of cool every time I hear that. Yeah. All right. You want me to go with my next choice?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, boy, this is a tough one. Should I stick it to the man and go underdog, or should I
go with your gut, Martin? Gotta go
sober here. Well, okay, let's stick it to the man, and we'll go Deep Purple next. So there we go. So Deep Purple, yeah, I've been a Deep Purple fan since I was 9 years old. Back in '72, I suppose, was when I started my long journey with these guys. Yeah, love them to death. I've often said, you know, we always, you know, all of us, I think, always put them in the category of these bands that are making some of their best music now. They're so inspired, you know, by Bob Ezrin as well, helping out with them. They've got this strange, interesting production sound that nobody else has anymore, where you've got, you know, a singular Ian Pace drum sound, and you've got really interesting fusion of keyboards, which is really a carry on from what they did with John Lord anyways. But yeah, all through the years, you know, I have gone, where is my framed up one of these? I guess I don't have it handy here. Yeah, I don't know where I put it. So anyways, you know, I did a Contrarians episode where I called this my favorite Deep Purple album. And again, the argument was a little bit, Phil, same thing, based on the math, based on having a third of every Deep Purple album, you know, something I could complain about, sort of thing. And I felt mathematically this one had the most going for it of all of them, because, you know, being a curmudgeon as I am, I always think of the songs I can complain about with Deep Purple over the years. But you know, there's really nothing from the catalog other than the classical album and all of the first three. I hate all of them. But everything past that, I greatly appreciate every single Deep Purple album, and that includes, you know, Slaves and Masters, that includes Stormbringer, that includes Battle Rages On, whatever. I really like every single one of them, starting with In Rock forward, and I hate the first four. So that's my number two of the four.
Every time you do that, Martin, you always miss, and you mention all the albums, you obviously don't go near the live ones. Because
I don't really care. And I'm not a big fan, of course, of the long, you know, whatever. But I basically usually don't even enter into the discussion, because to me, live albums are sort of greatest hits albums. They aren't really. It's just not a factor for me. So
is that Pete? Is that the same for you? Because I know a lot of people do like ranking videos and stuff. They kind of miss out the live ones. In the UK, the live album was part of the story of what, you know, if you make a list of your favorite albums, the live, for me, in fact, my top 3 Deep Purple albums are Burn, Come Taste the Band, and Made in Japan. So Made in Japan is like very important to me. I know for Martin, it's one of the, it's like kryptonite for Superman.
Well, here's my take, Phil, and I've talked about this before, and people ask this all the time, and I'll explain it again. I love live albums. For a lot of these classic bands, some of my favorite releases by them are the live albums. So when I do ranking catalogs, I generally don't include the live albums because they would almost automatically always be at the top of the list, and I find that very predictable. So I tend to not include them, although I will talk about them. I mean, you know, Made in Japan and Made in Europe are two of my favorite live albums of all time. I think Purple were a terrific live band, still are a really good live band. So yeah, that's why I don't include them, because I feel it's like I would just default to, you know, Made in Japan and Made in Europe would be at the top, and, you know, Rainbow on Stage, and, you know, all this kind of stuff. It's like, so I tend to not include them. I mean, I see Martin's point. I know a lot of people who don't like the 70s live albums because there is so much stretching out and jamming and things like that. I mean, I get it. Like, it's not for everybody. Kind of has different opinions on live stuff, but yeah, that's why I don't include them.
I found my framed up one of these, so there we go.
Oh, there you go.
Cool.
My House of Blue Light with a little Battle Rages on there. And I've got 2 Deep Purple books in print and 2 out of print, but I may be rectifying that eventually. But
so real quick before we move back on to Martin's next choice, which we obviously know what it is, what would you guys say, since we're talking about live albums here? So I'm pulling out. So we got Live in the Heart of the City. We've got On Stage. We've got what is it, Double Trouble. I've got it all here somewhere. Double Trouble, which of course is not fully live. And then we've got Made in Japan and Made in Europe. What would you say is the strongest or your favorite live album out of all of those?
My God, I hate them all. Every one of those. I all I can think about is friggin' Mistreated and you know, all these long bull crap songs. I hate them all. I hate them all. At least those ones.
I think you mentioned this, Martin, when we first had a chat together, that in some ways the Purple bit was in the extended versions. Because I remember, for me, you'd buy the studio album and you'd look at the track lengths. This is very important when you're young and you're getting into music. You look at how long the tracks are, and then you get the live album, and you especially Made in Japan, because you're aware that there are only 7 tracks on it, the same amount of tracks as there are on Machine Head. So something must be going on within those grooves that's beyond your comprehension of what happened on the studio album. And that was part of the excitement for me with the Purple family, was they would take the songs somewhere else. I mean, when I first heard Made in Japan, I didn't know that within Speaking they were doing bits of Mandrake Root. I just thought they'd just gone off and it created this whole universe of sound that wasn't within the little 4-minute something of the Space Trucking version on Machine Head. So to me, it was so exciting, and it still is. With regards to which one would I put where, Made in Japan's at the top. Gillan, as much as I said they are such a wonderful band and inventive, I don't feel they released a live album to represent what Gillan was about, and I don't think Double Trouble is it. I very rarely played that. The Whitesnake one, again, it was from 2 separate concerts, wasn't it? And it felt, I'd never really gelled with that one either. But Rainbow on Stage, which was criminally short. I mean, the Mistreated side 3 is about, what, 12 minutes long? But the excitement when that came out in the height of punk in the UK. And you know, the way that Blackmore starts Mistreated with that, where he was in his guitar style of playing them, was just off the scale for me. It was like, this is Richie Blackmore. And there were some wonderful moments. There are some indulgent moments, I agree. And I'm actually pleased they didn't put the drum solo on it. But there are some, it would be Made in Japan, On Stage, Whitesnake and Gillan from those definitive. Made in Japan, put somewhere else.
I think if On Stage had Stargazer on it, which it should have, that would have elevated that to classic status, I think, because I agree with I think some of the songs are a little too long. There's not enough stuff. And yeah, you know what I used to do back when I first got Made in Japan and Made in Europe, because I love both of them almost equally. I used to sit and play those songs and then play the studio versions back to back and really start to kind of hone in on the differences. It's like, oh, like Child in Time, I used to analyze like, well, Gillan's screams are a little bit different and he does this a little different here on the live album than here, and Blackmore's solo, like what are the differences? Which I used to sit and rank the guitar solos from the studio version versus the live version. I mean, I used to get really into the weeds with this stuff back then, and then that for me was thrilling, you know, and hearing all those little bits from older songs played during like Space Trucking and whatnot. It's like very, very cool, you know, all the little jams and things like that. So yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah.
All right, Martin, sorry.
All right, well, if they say Tales from Topographic Oceans caused punk rock, I think it was on stage that caused punk rock. So that's that's the problem here. So, and speaking of punk rock, I'm sticking it to the man and going with the punk rock Deep Purple is my favorite of the four. Love Gillan to death. This is a great catalog. It's a short catalog. Love the crazy Doorsy, wacky keyboards of Colin Towns. We used to complain about the production, but now I love this eccentric, strange, mid-rangey, trashy production. Fast songs, heavy songs, Gillan's wordplay all over them. The drumming of Mick Underwood, the beautiful shotgun snare work. I think of Mr. Universe, just the parts in that. Some of my favorite magical musical moments are on that song, and a lot of that is down to Mick Underwood. But yeah, there's heavy songs on these. Secrets of the Dance, Secret of the Dance, and all that. Dead of Night, Message in a Bottle. Great stuff on these. Oh, there's my framed up. So we got some UK ticket stubs in there. Not that I went to those shows, but we've got an Ian Gillan band in there. But yeah, of course, I feel I'm leaving out the Ian Gillan band in this whole thing. I mean, I make a distinct demarcation between Ian Gillan band, which is the wacky. Guys, we could probably do a show where we go the opposite end and go to the really extreme, obscure things from the Deep Purple album or catalog and talk about those, because I've actually often thought of compiling a list and doing a reverse order list of all of these albums in order, right? Which would be right. So, but yeah, love Gillan. And I got. Did I get this? Maybe my first. No, I don't think my first Gillan was the Canadian Glory Road, but I do have a Canadian Glory Road. Eventually got for Gillan fans only as a separate, strange little thing used. But and then we get up to Double Trouble, and Future Shock, Double Trouble, and then the last one, Magic. And Magic was just as cool and just as heavy, Demon Driver and all that stuff. So I thought this was just a really cool band, and every single album had a lot going for it. I'm not happy that Double Trouble's got the live album on it, but the other part of it just feels as part of this strange, wacky journey that these weirdos all together came up with, right? Yannick Gers at the end, Bernie Torme early on. Of course, we got John McCoy. And you think of that strange photo shoot that they did in the booklet of Future Shock. It's so cool, right? I just thought it was a really creative, interesting band, and it sounded like it was a lot of fun and a lot of drinking and a lot of blowing money. And where did the money all go? And how did this band sort of implode? It was almost doomed to implode because they were so punk rock. Everything about them was punk rock. That's what I love about Gillan.
Yeah, they certainly were. And I think when the Ian Gillan band came around, and they came around a lot where I lived, and I used to go to the Birmingham Odeon, and I was looking around behind me, and the place was like only 2/3 full. And then they came around again with Clear Air Turbulence, and again it was probably slightly less amount of people. And then they came around with Scarabus, and it had gone down again. And I was thinking, surely why can't everyone understand this? And then they vanished for a few months, because it was only a few months. And they played a small club in Birmingham called Barbarella's. And I thought, why are they playing there? And I didn't go because I'd started to feel, well, that's it, it's over. But one of my friends went, and he said, I went to see Gillan, and it wasn't the Ian Gillan band. And they just released the Japanese album, which they couldn't get released in the UK. And he said it was a totally different band. And he said it was just wild. It was like really full on heavy metal. But he said it was like they got this punk guitarist with all these different colors in his hair and everything, dressed up like a pirate. And then Mr. Universe came out. And I agree, Martin, it's one of the Rainbow Rising is seen as the ultimate classic, and the world's rock fans put it up there, don't they? But I think consistently Mr. Universe is more complete in a way. It's just complete, whereas Rainbow Rising does have 3 tracks that go down a bit, and a notch. Whereas Mr. Universe is just piles through, and their version of Smoke on the Water, which was tagged on as on the B-side of Vengeance, is just bonkers. It's just absolutely balmy. So yeah, I think that Gillan deserved this kind of laser beam focus on Mr. Universe and Glory Road especially. There was nothing like them. And when they played, things went wrong. John McCoy was like pogoing up and down with half his head shaved, the other half not. They just looked weird.
Yeah.
And Colin Towns was dressed like someone who'd just come from a gentleman's club with his velvet jacket. They just looked odd, but everyone loved them. And Gillan was like Gillan. He was very chatty in those days. You know, he dressed sometimes like a biker, and they were just unlike any other rock band. They really were like sticking it to the man and saying, we don't care at all. This is what we're going to do. And they were signed to Virgin Records, which was quite an unusual thing for a rock band to be signed to back then.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, that was awesome. That's really neat to hear that sort of insight. And you're right, Virgin was a place for new wave bands, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Would you guys agree that the short length of the catalog and the amount of years that they were actually a band helps them, because they didn't even have that opportunity to kind of jump the shark? Martin, we talked about this before. These bands that just kind of go off way longer than they should have. Do you think because of that looking back on the career of Gillan now and looking back on all these catalogs, that because it is only a short set of albums and they all are so strong, that maybe today we can look back on the catalog of Gillan as arguably stronger start to finish than any of these other bands, even the main band, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was such a distinct sound. And yeah, it literally sounds like it's such a distinct sound that you couldn't see that lasting. And especially with those production values, right? I mean, that was a sort of thing that I mean, probably next record in, they would have been told all 10 of these things you're doing are wrong and you got to fix all of them. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was truly lightning in a bottle. It was a time capsule. I don't think anybody was going to allow Gillan to make another record like Magic, say.
I mean, there's moments in Mr. Universe, isn't there, where the drums actually vanish in the mix because there's so much focus on Bernie Torme's guitar solo. It's just like, and the bass, the drums actually almost disappear, and I think that's because, again, it's just so almost like garagey. And what was going on around them was polished and becoming more pristine. And that was their approach, was like, it's rock and roll. This is what we're going to do. Yeah. And I think, you know, once we got to the Magic period, I think there was too much temptation coming from the Purple management to say, look how much money you could make if you all got back together. And I think their eyes were going elsewhere by then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Phil, if you were to look at all four of the bands and the catalogs, so Martin had the main band at number 2 and Gillan at number 1. If you had to look at all four together, do you automatically default to Purple as got to be number 1, or does it not work that way?
I do, actually. I think Deep Purple would default to number 1 because of I'm not one of these people. I mean, I'm not in a lot of Deep Purple Facebook groups because I can't cope with these people who go no Blackmore, no Purple. I just can't deal with that. I just see it as like a journey where all these, you know, right through to where we are now with Simon McBride. To me, it's just part of the excitement of where the Purple family and what they can do. And so, yes, so I default to Deep Purple being at the top because they've produced all these tendrils that has influenced my record collecting or music, you know, taste for, you know, since I was very small, really. And, you know, I've gone off and, you know, people like Steve Morse and Dixie Dregs and all the stuff that Glenn Hughes did, as all because of Purple. So, yeah, Purple would be at the top. And then it would be Gillan, then Rainbow, then Whitesnake. And then underneath it would be Hughes.
The whole no Blackmore, no Purple thing is frustrating for me, too. I mean, he's one of my favorite guitar players of all time. Yeah. So I get it. But I mean, when you look at the overall history of the band and the amount of time that he spent in the band, it's pretty small compared to a lot of it. It's just, and you know, I get it. He was he's amazing guitar player. He added the danger to this band, all those riffs, all those solos. I totally get it. But you know, I get really frustrated when people refuse to listen to anything that he wasn't on. When you have all these fine albums that they did, the Steve Morse era, the Tommy Bolin album. I mean, you know, it's just, so that's, I don't join those groups either, because I just can't take it. Right. I mean, you know, Martin and I did a whole show a while back on the greatness of the latter part of the catalog. I mean, these are some, you know, terrific albums. I mean, it's to just not discount these albums.
Pete, we haven't heard your ranking yet. We got to hear your ranking.
Okay. All right. So and this is really difficult, and I could probably change. And again, you have to understand, like most people here in the States, Gillan was a non-entity here. I didn't get into the Gillan bands till way, way late. So based on my history, I almost have to put Gillan at number 4, even though I think these albums are terrific. And the reason why I asked the question of you guys before about the shortness of the catalog, does it make this catalog perhaps start to finish the strongest? I would say that. I would even agree with that. I think there's no better, 6 albums in a row in either catalog than these. But it's all there is. And we've got such a bigger, body of work. I would put Rainbow in at number 3. And again, it's driven heavily by this. It's driven heavily by this. I do like the debut. I don't rank it as high as some of the other ones. I love Straight Between the Eyes. I think all the other albums, Down to Earth is great. I mean, Difficult to Cure, they're all really, really good.
It's hard to believe there's only one more album than the Gillan catalog. Although, there's the Messy album, right? There's
Stranger in Us All,
Stranger in Us All. I don't know if it's a Rainbow album or not, but
I don't.
It's
good. It's good.
Always puts us in a bad mood bringing that one up, right? I don't like messiness.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, guys, if I didn't have the long history with Rainbow, and if it wasn't for Rising, I would argue that the Gillan catalog is stronger. Just me personally. I have to go with Whitesnake for number 2. And again, love all this stuff. I mean, this is all great. And again, as we talked about in the episode we did yesterday, a lot of these early albums were non-entity, not available here in the States. And it really wasn't until it slided in that anybody really gave a shit about Whitesnake here. And then, of course, they got
very true.
This. I like all the latter albums. Slip of the Tongue is good for what it is. I agree with what Martin said though before. It's like, the cracks were showing it. It's kind of like a put together band and all that. But man, I think like Forevermore and Good.
Totally agree.
Really good stuff. I would say maybe Purple I think has the stronger latter period catalog, but I think the Whitesnake stuff is great. But I gotta default to Purple as my number 1. The first 4 albums, or first 3, those first early albums, they're okay for what they are. I don't listen to them often. I'm not a huge fan when I generally rank the albums of Deep Purple, the Book of Taliesin and Deep Purple and whatnot, and Shades of Purple. Those generally come at the bottom. There's good stuff on there, but for me, I mean, this is unquestionably one of the great albums of all time. I think Fireball is absolutely underrated, one of my favorites. Machine Head, not one of my absolute favorites, but it's classic for what people are probably looking like. What the hell is he holding up here? I got this weird reissue with the slipcase and Made in Japan, Made in Europe, great. Burn is one of my favorite albums by them. Stormbringer is terrific. Come Taste the Band is terrific. Perfect Strangers, obviously great. Battle Rages On is really good. I think that gets kind of shit on sometimes, but I think it's a very solid album. The Joe Lynn Turner album is not one of my favorites, although as an album itself, it's pretty damn good. As a Deep Purple album, I have kind of issues with it because it's too much like Rainbow, but whatever. I think the majority of the Morse albums are great. I'm very excited to hear a Simon McBride album, which I believe they're going to do, right? I mean, I think they're working with Bob Ezrin once again, and I've seen some live footage. Oh, did we lose Phil?
Oh,
there he is.
Oh, he's coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, that Joe Lynn Turner album, I actually really like it. It's probably one of the ones I play the most out of those, simply because of that whole thing about them being we're sick of all the other ones so much. But I mean, is Whitesnake your favorite album of all time still?
It
like
was.
You've said that before, right?
I know. It is Slide It In has bumped it as my favorite Whitesnake album over the last couple of years.
But what about favorites of all time? Didn't you have it as favorite of all time?
It was in my top 2 favorite albums of all time for many, many years.
Wow, that's crazy. So what is your favorite album of all time now?
I don't know if I want to divulge that now, Martin, because it's one of the
Okay.
albums I just mentioned before. But seeing as I'm doing a favorite hard rock and metal albums of the '70s countdown this month, I don't know if I should say
Okay.
that.
All right. Fair enough.
But no, yeah, you're absolutely right. The Whitesnake album was my favorite album, or my number 2 album since it came out for like 30 years.
Yeah.
But in recent years, maybe because I've just played it too much, Martin. I think in recent years, I have really grown extra love for Slide It In, which is the first Whitesnake album I ever bought, to be honest.
Yeah, one's going way up for me too.
Yeah, and it's just I've just gone to again, it's probably overplayedness for the '87 album, but anyway, Phil, before you dropped out real quick, we were talking about Simon McBride being in Purple now, and how I don't know if you've seen them live with him or seen any live clips.
I've seen some live stuff, and obviously I've seen him playing when he did Gillan did those concerts in Russia around there for those double albums. I think he's a great player.
Yeah,
I really think he fits in really, really well. I really do.
Style-wise, I absolutely agree. I would argue, I hate to say this because I'm a massive fan, I would think based on his style of playing, he might even be a better fit than Steve Morse was.
Yeah, I'm gonna go along with that, because he's got, there's a fluidity to his playing that's closer to Blackmore, whereas Morse has got a kind of more of a technical jazz rocky country picking type style. I think Simon McBride does tap into Blackmore's bluesy fluidity in his playing. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
More importantly, let's see if he can write and wants to write and is allowed to write. Right. I mean, he's got some strong guys to deal with in Bob Ezrin and Ian Gillan. Is he going to be welcomed with open arms? I mean, those guys basically have a pretty healthy creative spirit, and they like creativity. So if he's creative and wants to get in there and write, I have a feeling that they would embrace that.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of egos in that band too, right? They so you never know what the situation will be, and there's strong opinions, right? It's not so much ego, it's more like they're very opinionated, right? All of them. So it's going to be getting in there and really being part of the thing. I think they're going to respect that if he does that. But I just hope he's not what is it, shirking violent or shrinking violent? I've heard both, right? I hope he's in there writing, and that's going to give the band some fresh legs.
Yeah, but I think there's the other dynamic though that's in amongst all of this is, of course, the age of the band. I mean, Simon McBride might be really, all guitarists come with some sort of ego built in, in his band, and they are a guitar-driven band. And so if he comes up with something that was along the lines of Burn or Highway Star or a really fast, typical Purple-esque song, Gillan has got to assess whether it's something he can sing night after night. So it does make me wonder whether the songwriting will adapt to where they are physically within themselves as well.
Yeah, because I'd heard many times, and in fact, Steve himself kind of told me that during this Bob Ezrin run of albums, that he was told to kind of tone down the solos a little bit and leave space for other things like keyboards and whatnot. So you had to think ultimately that might have frustrated Mr. Morse just a little bit, being the creative guy that he is, right? And I think that I saw the band with Steve Morse many times live, and he tended to give his own flavor to all of Blackmore solos, which I think people got used to after.
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Yeah, but based on the live footage I have seen with Simon McBride so far, I think he tries pretty hard to get to the essence of the Blackmore style of soloing on those songs. And I think he gives the old classics a little bit more of the Blackmore flavor than Morse did. Whether it's good, bad, or ugly, whatever, it depends on your preference. So I have to wonder. And he's got a different look too, right? He's got the really short hair. He's younger. It's just like he brings a different dynamic. But I have to wonder if folks, if they give the new lineup now a chance with Simon on guitar, that people who were always screaming for Blackmore, and it's not the same without Blackmore, might think otherwise because they've got this new guy who is probably playing a little bit more to the way these songs sounded originally than maybe Steve Morse did.
So what do you guys think? Like if A, he writes, and B, he wants to write more riffy and heavy metal, what do you think the other guys will form as a reaction to that? Do you think they'll embrace it, or do you think they'll push back?
I think kind of like what happened with Perpendicular, because Steve Morse was very involved in the creation of that album. I think they will initially embrace it as a way to get the new guy out to the public. But if they continue going on past that, I think we'll start to see some of the similar things we saw with subsequent Purple albums after Morse had been in the band for a couple of years. So we'll see. I don't know. It's a great question, Martin.
I agree with Peter. I think that's what we'll see, because Perpendicular had like things like the Aviator on it, and they just let it almost felt like they just said to Steve, "What you got?" And he just said, "I've got loads of stuff," and they just, "Well, let's do that then." And then as it went on, it became more. They brought the focus further in. So I think with Simon, they'll want to establish him as the new guitar player, and I think they might be really open to whatever he's got. I mean, his solo albums are more bluesy, aren't they? He's got that. I mean, I know, Martin, I've said the word bluesy and you'll think, oh my God, but I think he comes from that Rory Gallagher kind of school of, he's grew up with that, hasn't he? So it will be interesting to see if he pulls some of that into the songwriting.
Yeah. So before we go,
Ian's going to point to his watch and say, by the way, guys, I'm 80 years old. I'm retiring. Stop talking about our third and our fourth album here.
So speaking of time, so before we go, my last question for all of us here today is to pick your 3 favorite albums across these entire catalogs. Martin, top 3 favorite albums across all of them.
Wow. I think I'll go with Down to Earth, Mr. Universe. Boy, you know what? I almost don't. I'm not sure I have a Deep Purple and a Whitesnake album to go in here.
All right, you know what? Pick your favorite one from each catalog. I'll make it easier.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to stick with Perfect Strangers and that whole mathematical love the whole thing, solid throughout sort of thing. And I think I'm going to go to Slide It In now as well. I'm convinced by this praise for that album. That one's rising fastest for me of all the Whitesnake ones.
Okay, Deep Purple would be Burn. Gillan would be Mr. Universe. Rainbow would be Rising, and Whitesnake would be Ready and Willing.
Cool.
And sitting underneath there in Division 3 would probably be Hughes Thrall with Glenn Hughes.
Ah, nice. Yeah, I would go Rising, In Rock, Mr. Universe, and Slide It In, I think, for me.
Nice.
Favorite song, one song across the entire catalog.
Burn.
Almost impossible, right?
Yeah, just Burn for me.
I know mine. I'm proselytizing for this song all the time. Lost in Hollywood.
Wow, very nice. Probably for me, Still of the Night.
Oh. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. See, there's that 87 album again, Martin. See, I would kind of fall back on that in some fashion, right?
We know that's the greatest riff across all 4 of these bands.
So. I would say that and Burn for me are, because Burn is terrific.
Yeah, you can't deny the effect that Still of the Night had when it first appeared.
Yeah,
it was just mesmerizing.
Yeah. So Phil, as someone who picked Burn, what do you like better, the studio version or the Made in Europe version?
I'm going to say the studio version, but if I had to pick a live version, it would be the one from Live in London, which was a BBC recording. To me, that's the definitive version of Burn, that Live from London.
There's a lot of good ones.
There's a lot of good ones.
The one you mentioned is good. The Graz one is good too.
Yeah, they're all good. Yeah, all of them.
Yeah. God, we could do a whole separate show on that. Anyway.
Yeah. the best of Burn. Yeah, the track.
Yeah. So Phil, what's new happening on your channel? Any good programming coming up?
Well, I'm actually going to start. I'm going to do about 2 or 3 different ranking videos, which I know they've been done to death all around the world, but I haven't done them. So I'm going to do my own take on Uriah Heep. One of them is going to be inspired by Martin, who said I should do a Deep Purple live ranking video because of how many live albums there are, and a lot of people get confused. And I'm also going to look at UFO as well. Nice.
Martin, what's going on over on the Contrarians and podcast and books and things?
Kind of working away. I guess I got a new episode of the podcast that will drop today. What did I? Oh yeah, it was a comparison of Sabbath. Who was it? Sabbath and Zeppelin's first 8 albums as doppelgangers of each other, lining them all up, sort of thing. Nice. How that goes. And then, yeah, the books are all at martinpopoff.com. And Contrarians, we just had our excellent episode with Sean Kelly again, who broke down the Skid Row Subhuman Race album. That was really cool. And we had one about the question of what does having unlimited music for basically free, what has that done to your head, sort of thing.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
Good topic. Martin and I will be back on Friday morning, of course, at the Funhouse. We've got a topic that basically got spawned from yesterday's show we did with Phil and Peter Kerr, all about pomp rock and what is pomp rock and what are some of the key bands that make up this kind of weird style of music that gets mentioned every so often, right? So that's Friday. And Phil and I are going to be doing what's going to be a recurring series starting real soon, where we're going to be talking about songs that perfectly Phil, how did we kind of pose this? Songs that
define the guitarist.
Define a guitarist, that's it, right? Yeah. So each episode we're going to talk about 10 guitar players, and Phil and I are each going to talk about one song that we feel defined that guitar player, to see if we match any of them or we don't match. And each episode the guitar players will be picked by one of us. So the first episode in the series are all guitarists that Phil has chosen. So we're each going to pick a song for each guitar player that we feel really defines that guitarist. And then the following episode will be all of mine, and we'll go back and forth, because we know there's like a million guitar players out there that we love. So we could literally do this show forever and ever and ever. So that's coming up. So lots happening. And for those of you who watched yesterday's episode, thank you so much for all of the great comments and feedback through the show that we did with Peter, all about the different countries and bands that were big in their own country. Anyway, the praise was heard, and we are going to try and do follow-up episodes with the 4 of us once again and come up with some new topics and things. So maybe something like once a month or once every other month, because it's difficult to get our schedules to align. But we hear you, we thank you, and it's very much appreciated. So we enjoyed it as well. So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, all together, all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell so you get alerted of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button. Please also investigate these other channels from these 2 fine gentlemen right here. And we thank you for watching, everybody. For Phil Aston and Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Enjoy the rest of your week, everybody. And once again, happy 4th of July to everybody here in the States. I am Pete Pardo. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.